And good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Opportunity Makers. Before we get started, as I've been doing, I want to take a moment to acknowledge our First Nations people. In Muskoka, where I live, particularly the First Nations people who have been and continue to be the caretakers of this beautiful land, are the Chippewas of Rama, the Wada Mohawks, and the Métis Moon River and Inuit. So this is part of reconciliation and recognizing that this beautiful land was and is under the great care of our First Nations people. So thank you for allowing me to do that. And without further ado, I want to talk about my guest this morning, Eric Spencer. I met Eric after I heard about Eric and heard about the book that he had written, You, Me, and We. We had not met, but we both know each other through the work that we do through BJ Fogg. And I got very excited about his book and wanted to have him on the show. And so here we are. Rather than talk about Eric, I'm going to bring him on and welcome Eric to the show.
Thanks, Libby. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to join you and have some coffee.
Yes, exactly. We absolutely have to have our coffee. If you are, Eric, you've already commented. If I'm looking off to the side, that is because I'm looking at the comments that you're making. Good morning to you, Curry. And if you have any questions or comments as you go along, please put them in the chat and we'll try to answer those. So I'll briefly look over every once in a while this morning. So I want to get right into this. This book, You, Me, We, Becoming a Best Friend at Work. Yes, there we go. We all need a friend at work, and we need to figure out what that looks like to be a friend at work. And I want to start the conversation with something that you write about early in the book, which is the Gallup Q12.
Yep.
And probably a lot of people on the line know what the Gallup Q12 questions are. Those are all related to high levels of engagement, which correlate to productivity and profits, et cetera, et cetera. But one of those questions.
Yes.
I have a best friend at work.
The elusive Q10.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I have my perspective on it. I've certainly worked with it in organizations who have been Gallup engagement organizations and have struggled to help people with it. Why is it such a tough question? Let's start there.
It's been such a tough question in my history. I've had executives ask me, hey, can we do the Gallup, but do we have to include question 10? Because I find it fluffy and I don't know that I want to have people talking about that, right? I mean, the idea of being friends at work, if you think back to the olden days, where you left your personal stuff at home and you brought your business stuff to work,
mm-hmm.
as if you could cleave yourself into and be two separate people, right? There was not a welcoming acknowledgement of bringing your whole self to work.
Right.
And that's evolved over time. But it's still not perfect. The idea of relationships at work, I think, is a little bit intimidating to some people,
mm-hmm.
and frightens them to some degree, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want folks ganging up on the management or whatever, right? People being friendly at work can take the eyes off of collective productivity.
Yes.
In a fear state.
And then Lord help you if you become a manager and now you can't be friends with anybody at work.
Can't be friends with anybody. Yeah.
No, it's against the rules. It's against the rules. But it's funny, Gallup was so specific about the language in all of their questions. And it wasn't just, do you have a friend at work?
Yeah, best friend.
Do you have a best friend at work? And the last organization I worked at, we had a lot of people talking about their work husband, their work wife, their, that was sort of the language that people were putting around having a best friend. But what is the difference when you have a best friend at work?
What we've learned over the last decade is that the quality and depth of the relationships that you have at work, single biggest influencer of happiness, engagement, and productivity, right? I had an executive ask me one time, person I was coaching, and he said, do I have to be friends with these people? Because I really just want to do this work and go home. That's all I want to do. And, my response is always, well, you don't have to. And I'm not going to tell you can't or you can. You're the boss. It's your show.
Mm-hmm.
It's better when you are, or when you do have those relationships, right? Even the Gallup data will play it out. People that have a best friend at work are more engaged. They're more productive. They're happier people,
Mm-hmm.
right? They get to be their authentic self more often than not at work, which
Yes.
changes things.
Yeah. Yeah.
We thought the Gallup question was great. Do I have a best friend at work? But it's a passive question. I can say yes or no. So we wanted to flip the question over to, am I a best friend at work?
And I think that's amazing. That's pivotal.
Yeah.
And as you say in the book, you can't expect to have a best friend at work if you're not being a best friend at work.
Yeah. One of the questions that we got quite frequently at the end of a workshop or a keynote on this topic, people would come up to us and they would say, how do I get more allies? And, it's one of those situations where you're like, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, and I wish I had a better answer for you here. But the answer is you have to be one.
Yeah.
You have to show up as one and hope that takes root, right? The only thing that you can influence are the decisions that you make. And that's really what the bulk of this book is about. It's about the choices that you intentionally make in specific relationships at work or at home. It works the same. People are people.
Yes, I think so. So I think what people need to do is bringing your whole self to work. Curry has said, yes, absolutely. I had a boss who made such a distinction between work and home. She came to work one day. She ran. We were both runners.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to run. She lived in Oakville. She would run around the track close to her home. And she came in one morning and she said, you won't believe who was running on the track this morning.
Oh, who? Dish that.
Yes. The vice chairs of the bank.
Oh.
Running. And I said, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Like, you guys can be running buddies. Are you kidding? No. I mean, I haven't showered. I'm in my gym clothes.
Right.
And she said, but he runs too slow. And so I'm going to have to change my route.
Oh boy.
Oh, okay. Missed opportunity there.
Right.
I mean, this was back in the 90s when maybe some people still had the idea that you had to separate the two, but yeah, you got to bring your best friend or your whole self rather. Right. Now, you used a word. You said, how do you be an ally at work? Yeah. So this book talks about the ally mindset.
Correct.
There are 4 distinct types of people that you work with.
Yeah.
And I love this. I know lots of them in all of these categories. So an adversary. Yeah. By the way, if you're watching this, you want to get a pen and write these 4 types down. Yeah, and write down some of the things that Eric described. So what's an adversary?
So we call this the relationship ecosystem, and it's a 4-square grid that is split by 2 sets of axes. If you split the grid vertically, the top half of the model is a more unconditional space, whereas the bottom half of the model is a more conditional space. If you split it left-right, the left side of the model is a more me-focused space, and the right side is a more we-focused space. So an adversary is an unconditional me. It's all me all the time, all day, every day. I am entering into situations with you, the other person in the relationship, and I am looking for how this can benefit me and only me. Mm-hmm. And if there's an opportunity to knock you down a peg, because I will get the resultant lift from knocking you down, I won't hesitate to do it. Adversarial relationships happen. It's one of those questions that we ask during keynotes where I say, who here has or has had an adversary at work? And you get people that are like, I don't know, maybe once upon a time. It's not an everyday thing. It takes a lot of energy to show up all me all the time. So I think about the relationship ecosystem. It's a snapshot in time, right? Yeah. There are certain days I'm going to have more gas in the tank, right? There are certain days that I'm going to show up differently at work. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
adversaries, all me all the time. I'm looking for an opportunity to advance at the expense of somebody else.
Right. Yeah. And what great movies that have a work context are made of.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? It's a great caricature.
Right.
Much more prevalent are rivals.
Rivals. Yeah. So this slips down into that conditional space. Sometimes it's me first. Sometimes it's us first. It depends on the situation and it depends on what we're working on together. Um, I work with a lot of managers who say things like, oh, there's no rival behavior on my team. They don't compete with each other at all. And that's not true, right? We're
Mhm.
always finding ourselves in situations where we will compete with our peers, even if it's just for the manager's time, for cool projects to work on, promotional opportunities. I've worked in many an organization that has a force distribution performance management system. I only got so many fives to give, and I've got 12 people on my team. Everybody's not getting a five.
Exactly.
So we are competing,
Yeah.
right? And again, that happens in different spots over time.
Mhm.
Some days, the things we're working on, we are lockstep, and I've got your back. Some days, I've got my back.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I can see where I have been in competition
Sure.
with somebody else, and other times I would never be in competition
Right.
because we might be working in the same department, but maybe we're not on the same team and
Sure.
in such different functions that
Yeah.
we don't become rivals.
Yep.
So,
Doesn't matter. Our
yeah,
spheres don't overlap, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm going to skip over one and go straight to ally because I want you
Okay.
to define ally first and then come back to
Sure.
this other piece.
Yeah.
Well, how do
So
you define an ally at work? And by the way, if you haven't already looked up You, Me, We, it's available on Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and any other bookseller that you might be inclined to buy from.
absolutely.
So you'll want to get this book, and it's not just information; it is very practical and has some amazing questions for you to think about as well. But
Yeah.
I digress.
All
Tell us
right.
what an ally is.
So if you think about that grid, right, we're up in the unconditional space, we're in the we space. So it's an unconditional we relationship. I'm in it for the betterment of the relationship always. I'm going to tell you the feedback that you need to hear, not just the feedback that you want to hear.
Mhm,
If something goes really well, I'm there to cheerlead you. If something doesn't go so well, I'm there to help you get better,
mhm,
right? I'm going to have the difficult conversations in the moments or as close to the moments as possible versus waiting for my annual 360 shot to give you that feedback,
right.
right? I am trying to make conscious choices in how I show up in this relationship for the betterment of us. And there are 5 practices in the ally mindset that we can talk about later. Um, but I am making intentional choices to put credits in the bank, to put gas in the tank of this relationship, to plug in our EV. I guess we're going to have to change metaphors now, right? We're not putting gas in the tank so much anymore. Um, the EV that is our relationship, right? I'm going to charge it up. I'm going to
Mhm,
recharge it. And I'm going to be making conscious choices about that all the time.
yeah.
But you left out one relationship dynamic on purpose, didn't you, Libby?
I did, and it's the supporter,
Yeah.
the person who has your back, I think.
Right. Right.
Pretty
Supporters
sure.
sounds great. It's like, motherhood and apple pie and baseball. They're great until they're not. And it's interesting because when I first started working with Morag a decade ago, when she was just finishing up her first book, Cultivate, these relationship dynamics are defined in that book. And I was asking her about them, and she defined supporters as insidious. And I thought, ooh, that is a rough word. I mean, supporters are a good thing, right? They're on the right side. They're on the we side of the model. They're there most of the time. Insidious makes them sound like, Darth Vader or something. What is that all about? And she said, supporters sometimes they show up and they look like allies, and we think that they are.
Mhm,
And we may find ourselves in situations where we are depending on them to have our backs.
mhm,
And then the stuff hits the fan and they don't.
mhm.
And we can find ourselves exposed, damaged, hurt because of the expectations that we had put on that relationship. So that's what's insidious about it, in that you don't know which supporter you're going to get. Supporters are generally good. They support you, they cheerlead you, they celebrate your successes. But when things get tough, they become less likely to take a risk. I always think about people jumping out of airplanes, perfectly good airplanes. Your ally is going to link arms with you. You go out the door together.
Yeah.
The supporter, I always describe it as, they're going to watch you go, and they're going to look and make sure your chute opens. Because if it doesn't, I'm not going. I'm going to land.
Well, and you and I were talking about this, and it's likened back to an awful lot of 360s that I have been a part of a debrief on, where I've had to pick people up off the floor.
Yeah.
Because they thought that they were supported, and the feedback would suggest that they are not really supported. And, you hear people come up to you and say, I decided to tell the truth this time.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so
you've been lying to me.
Call your best friend.
Yeah.
Not so much today.
Yeah. And that's a very good example of the difference between ally and supporter behavior. That supporter is nicing you to your face. Yes, I'm making nice a verb. They're nicing you to your face. But when they get the opportunity to do that, sort of quasi-anonymous 360, they're going to tell the truth.
Yeah.
The ally is going to tell you the truth every day.
And I think that's so important. So we're not going to have time to get into all of the ways in which you can show up as an ally. You're going to have to buy that book.
Yeah, look at that.
Find that out. Exactly. But I'm going to read these out. So the mindset has, no, you don't call them skill. What do you call them?
We call them practices, because you're never going to get them right 100% of the time. You have to keep practicing.
So you can learn how to show up as a best friend at work, and recognize your best friends at work.
Yeah.
So again, if you've got a pen, write these down: abundance and generosity, connection and compassion, courage and vulnerability, candor and debate, action and accountability. And then there's one final one that I'm going to leave for the end. So of these practices, then you said that an ally won't wait for anonymous feedback. In fact, they'll tell you what they said, but they will tell you far in advance of the 360 ever happening. They will give you feedback. You'll be feedback for each other, probably. So which of the practices, I think I know which one it is, but which of the practices is it?
Well, you think about these practices, and, Libby, we were talking in the pre-show about preferences and tendencies, and instruments like DISC. Just like DISC, certain things come naturally to us or come a little bit easier. Of these 5 practices, depending on how you're wired, some of them are going to be easier for you than others. Right? I work with a person who just abundance and generosity just comes out of her. That's just how she's wired, right? It comes out of her in a way that's a little bit harder for me. I need to turn up a little bit more energy to make that one happen, right? Connection and compassion is pretty straight up easy for me. That's where I tend to focus. So sometimes that feedback comes from that place of empathy, from that place of connection and compassion. Sometimes that feedback, that performance-oriented feedback, I got to have a straight up conversation with you, and I'm going to have to dip into my candor and debate space, which that's my weak link. I'm a DISC C. I don't do conflict. I figure you're a smart person. You'll figure it out.
Yep.
Because I don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation.
Yep.
I have to turn the energy up on that one. I have to say, okay, Libby's my ally. I owe it to her to tell her this feedback as close to the time that it happened as possible. So I need to, put on my adult pants and go have that conversation.
Yeah. It's the reading through of each of these is so interesting because I might have had different labels on some of these things. I'm not so sure that the label is, the thing to get hung up on. But to put it all together, I absolutely see some of the areas where I am strong. And my candor and debate is not so bad. I do know that in one particular 360, I had like my highest scores in courageous authenticity.
Ooh.
In other words, I used to call the crap out in meetings. And it didn't always work for me, except a few people always came up to me at the end and said, "Thank you so much for saying that." It's exactly what we were all thinking, but none of us had the courage to say it.
Right.
That wasn't necessarily a one-on-one, hey, I got to have a conversation with you. You have, as part of the book, the opportunity for anybody who's reading it to take the assessment.
That's right.
And so what's the assessment going to provide you with? Because all of these things are important. You said, you've got some real comfort in some areas and not so much. What will the assessment do for you?
Yeah, so the assessment is going to give you a little bit of insight into which of these 5 practices come easiest to you, right? So for me, wasn't a huge surprise to see that candor and debate was a challenge for me, right? It gave me a framework for when I'm thinking about these relationships, and I know that I'm going to be investing in a particular one, right? It gives me just a frame of reference for where I'm going to need to turn up the energy and where I can rely on my natural tendencies to get me where I need to be, right? Humans are creatures of pattern, and we do things the way we do them because that's the way we've always done them, right? Yeah. And for other people, people are complex and messy, right? So when that other person is wired more similarly to me, my intention and my impact are going to be aligned much more often. We were talking disc before. So if I'm a C and you're an I, maybe it takes a little more energy to make sure that those intentions and impacts are aligned. And the assessment's going to give me, the profile rather, is going to give me just an indication as to what mine are. And if we're in an ally relationship, I would say, Libby, you take it too, and let's look at it, right? See where you're going to gravitate and where I'm going to gravitate. And what do we need to do just to make sure that we're showing up as equally around that circle as we can.
Yeah. So that's okay. So that's interesting. I didn't know whether I was going to throw you this curveball, and I'm gonna. You're up for it. Which is
easy on me.
I know. Well, have another sip of coffee for this one. It's not going to be that hard. But let's say, so I'm thinking of a past experience, a past relationship, where the person I'm thinking of was either they were definitely a rival.
Okay.
At minimum, they were a rival. I would say that most of the time they were adversarial.
Okay.
Do I bother trying to turn that relationship around?
This is the $1 million question.
It's like, isn't that on you? Yeah. Like, why don't I give you the book? You read the book, and then you start being less of a rival. How do you manage that? Because that's what was going through my mind.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. Number one, beware that mindset. Isn't this on you? I mean, clearly it's on each of us, right? Yeah. But one of the principles in the ally mindset is somebody's got to go first.
Right.
Right. And if I genuinely rather want this relationship to be different, well, then I got to go first.
Yeah.
Right? And I go first knowing that you may not go along. You may not want to play. You may be done with me or whatever, right? One of the critical decisions that we always have to make in deciding which relationships to invest in and how deeply to invest is if we have this adversary, rival, someone straddling the border between those two dynamics, we have to decide when we can't afford to invest anymore and we're going to stop. Yeah. Because I've seen people deplete themselves trying to fix a relationship, and they end up pouring an inordinate amount of energy into this one relationship and neglecting the other ones in their ecosystem
Right.
that they need to address. And that's why we, in the workshops that we do, we take people through a stakeholder analysis of, okay, what's the work that I got to do right now? And who are the most critical people to my success in completing those objectives?
Right.
Right. So I'm making some intentional choices. And if I'm just still banging my head against the, I got to fix Libby's relationship, and Libby doesn't want to play, well, that's at my expense. That's going to cost me.
Right. Right.
So
It's tricky because sometimes, that person is very close proximity and, yeah. So, but I like that. You do have to make some intentional choices and somebody has to go first. So you can do what you can do.
Because a lot of times people that I'll be coaching, they'll say they want things to be different, but they just want the other person to go first. They want them, right? They're like, can't they just do it? I'm like, yeah, it's just not how it works. Not how it works in real life. If you want it to be different, that's on you.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, there's one more thing that we have to talk about in the few minutes that we have left.
Yeah.
Trust. And I'm going to read this statement from the book. Trust is an enigma wrapped in a riddle. We know it when it's missing, but we're often oblivious to trust when it's present. It's nebulous, touchy-feely to the extreme, and yet fundamental to everything we do in life. So you don't actually call it, do you call this one a practice? It is at the end of the book.
Yeah.
And so it is bigger than a practice.
Yeah, we call it the secret sauce.
Yeah.
It's the secret sauce to relationships. Trust is a fundamental underpinning. And, much like the Supreme Court of the United States back when it tried to define pornography, it said, oh, you know it when you see it. Trust is kind of the same way. We know it when we feel it. And a lot of people are stingy with trust. They say things like, you've got to earn my trust. And I always challenge that by asking people if they've ever been on an airplane. And they go, well, yeah, of course. And I said, so I assume if you are rigorous with how you dole out your trust, you interviewed the pilot then before you let him take off. Well, no. Okay. So you trusted that the airline trained that person to do the job and get you reasonably close to the destination that you were trying to get to at a reasonably close time. Yeah. So you're not that stingy with your trust then. You tend to be more stingy with it with the people that you know in your periphery than the pilot that you've never met. And they say things to me like, shut up, Eric. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
That is very, very telling. I mean, either everybody on this call are going to stop getting on airplanes or they're going to start thinking about what you just said and wish that you had just shut up before I asked that question. This is a great book, and the work that you and your co-authors and your partners do at SkyTeam it seems to me to be really incredible. So again, this is what the book looks like. Let me just flip a slide here to finish off so everybody knows how to get in touch with me. Oh, look at me. I'm wearing the same thing. It's my picture. But you can be reached at eric@skyteam.com. I've put in the link to your website for you, me, we, but you can totally go to Amazon in Canada, amazon.ca, easy peasy, Prime, got here in 2 days. So, Eric, this has been great. We could have gone on for a long, long time talking about this, and we barely scratched the surface. But I really, really want to thank you for being here and being my guest this morning. You're Denver time, so it is early for you. So extra thanks for that. And I think this is just the beginning. We didn't even scratch the surface on our mutual acquaintance and mutual work that we do with Mr. BJ Fogg of Tiny Habits. So conversation for another day on that one.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Libby. Super fun. And yeah, super grateful for BJ and that work and for introducing us inadvertently. That was, that's a gift. So I'm grateful for that as well.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for being here. If you're watching live or if you're watching the replay, thank you for a great conversation. No conversation next week, but we've got 3 or 4 great speakers lined up through April and May already. So stay tuned for more information on all of that. And thank you, Carl, always for being here. All right. Terrific. Thanks. Bye, everybody.